The colony ship Ardent Hope had been drifting for 6 hours when the Vreth war fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and surrounded it like a fist closing around a fly. There were 42,000 people on that ship. Families, mostly. Farmers, teachers, engineers, and children who had never seen anything but the inside of a metal hull. They were heading to a new world called Elon 7, a green planet 3 months away, and the biggest problem any of them had expected to face was soil acidity and crop rotation schedules. Then the engines failed. Then the Vreth arrived. The Vreth were not known for patience. They were known for efficiency. They had absorbed 11 species in 2 centuries, not through diplomacy or negotiation, but through a simple process: arrive, demand, destroy if refused. Their fleet commander, Warlord Kareth Vin, had personally overseen the absorption of 4 civilizations. He was large even by Vreth standards, a creature of dark plating and cold yellow eyes, with a voice that came out like grinding stone. His flagship, the Dominion's Fong, was longer than the Ardent Hope by a factor of 3, and it had guns that could crack a moon. He hailed the colony ship with all the ceremony of someone stepping on an insect. The communication screen flickered on inside the Ardent Hope's main bridge, and the 40 people standing there saw Kareth Vin for the first time. Several of them stepped back instinctively. The ship's captain, a steady woman named Priya Desai, held her ground, but her hands tightened on the railing in front of her. "You have entered contested space," Kareth Vin said. His translator rendered his words into flat, perfect English. "Your vessel is disabled. You have no military escort. You will surrender your population for processing, or we will begin destroying sections of your ship until you comply. You have 10 of your minutes." He cut the feed before anyone could respond. The bridge erupted. Officers shouted over each other. Someone was already trying to boost the distress signal again, even though it had been bouncing off dead relays for hours. A young navigation officer had gone pale and was gripping his console like it was the edge of a cliff. Captain Desai pressed her palms flat on the railing and said, quietly but firmly, "Everyone stop." They stopped. "We respond calmly," she said. "We stall. We try to reach any UEF patrol within range. We do not panic in front of 42,000 people who are counting on us." She looked around the room. "Is that understood?" It was understood. What happened next was not planned by anyone. The door at the back of the bridge opened, and an old man walked in. He was not supposed to be there. The bridge was a restricted area, and this man was a passenger, a civilian, listed on the manifest as Elias Cord, age 79, occupation listed simply as retired. He was thin and walked with a slight lean, the kind that comes not from weakness but from an old injury that healed slightly wrong. His hair was white and cut short. His face was deeply lined, but his eyes, gray-green and very still, moved around the room with a sharpness that seemed almost out of place on a man his age. Nobody challenged him immediately, which was strange. Later, people would say they didn't challenge him because he didn't look lost. He looked like he had come somewhere on purpose. "Captain Desai," he said. His voice was calm and low. She turned. "Sir, this area is— I know where I am," he said. "I need you to put Warlord Kareth Vin back on the screen." There was a long pause. "Excuse me," she said. "The Vreth commander. Put him back on, and then let me talk to him." One of the security officers moved toward Elias, hand raised to guide him out, and Elias turned his head and looked at the man with an expression that was not aggressive, not threatening, just deeply, utterly serious. The security officer stopped walking. He couldn't explain why, afterward. He just said it felt like trying to move a mountain 1 inch to the left. "Sir," Captain Desai said carefully, "I don't know what you think you can accomplish. I'm not here to negotiate a treaty," Elias said. "I'm not here to offer them anything. I just want to talk to him." He paused. "I've dealt with Vreth before." The bridge went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. This was not the quiet of shock. It was the quiet of people recalibrating. "When?" Desai asked. 40 years ago," Elias said. "Before most of your officers were born. Before the UEF signed the Oran Accords. Before the Vreth decided that absorbing species was more profitable than fighting them." He looked at the dark screen where Kareth Vin's face had been. "I was there when we made that calculus very uncomfortable for them." No one spoke. "I'm not going to pretend I can save everyone with a speech," he said. But I know something about this particular warlord's particular culture that your captain does not. And I know that the way you are about to respond, calmly, diplomatically, offering partial cooperation in exchange for time, is exactly the kind of response they have been trained to read as weakness. He looked at Desai. They won't give you the 10 minutes. They'll start firing in 4. Desai stared at him. Then she looked at her tactical officer, a young man named Ro, who was already watching his clock. Ro met her eyes and gave a tiny, grim nod. She looked back at the old man. For minutes, she repeated. 3 now, he said. She made a decision that surprised even herself. She waved at the communications officer. Reopen the channel. The screen lit up again. Kareth Vin appeared, and he was already leaning forward in his command chair with the look of someone who had already decided what they were going to do and was simply waiting out a formality. He saw Desai. He opened his mouth. Then Elias stepped forward into the camera's view, and something happened that nobody on the bridge had ever seen before. Kareth Vin's mouth closed. His yellow eyes moved from Desai to the old man. And for just a moment, a brief, flickering moment, something crossed the warlord's face that was not contempt, not calculation, not the cold efficiency of a conqueror. It looked almost like recognition. Elias said nothing at first. He just looked at the screen. And the silence stretched long enough that 2 of the bridge officers exchanged a glance, wondering if the old man had frozen, if this had all been a terrible mistake. Then Elias spoke. Kareth Vin, he said. Not warlord. Not commander. Just the name, flat and familiar, as if they had met before. You're a long way from the Denhari reach. The warlord's plating shifted, a Vreth expression that no human linguist had ever quite been able to classify. His yellow eyes narrowed. He did not fire. He did not speak. He just stared at the old man on the screen, and for the first time in the memory of anyone in his fleet, Warlord Kareth Vin looked like he was trying to figure out what to do next. Behind Elias, Captain Desai slowly released the breath she'd been holding. The clock on Ro's console ticked past the 4-minute mark. No shots came. The stars outside the Ardent Hope stayed quiet and cold and full, and 42,000 people drifted in the dark without knowing how close the edge had just been, or who was standing between them and it. A thin old man with gray-green eyes and a past that nobody on the ship yet understood, facing down a warlord who had never stopped for anything in his life until now. The silence on the channel lasted long enough that the Vreth officers aboard the Dominion's Fong began looking at each other. That, in itself, was unprecedented. Vreth did not look at each other during a conquest. There was nothing to look at each other about. The sequence was always the same. Demand, silence, fire. No warlord had ever paused long enough to make his crew uncertain. Kareth Vin broke the silence first. You should be dead, he said. Elias nodded slowly, as if this was a reasonable point. A lot of people have said that. The Vreth's second expansion. Caloris Station. You were there. It wasn't a question. I was there, Elias confirmed. On the bridge of the Ardent Hope, no one moved. Captain Desai had quietly signaled her crew to freeze. No sudden movements, no noise, nothing that would interrupt whatever was happening between this old man and the most dangerous individual any of them had ever seen on a screen. The tactical officer, Ro, had his hand hovering over a completely useless weapons console. He kept it there because it gave him something to do with his body while his mind tried to process the situation. Caloris Station, Kareth Vin said again, and his voice had changed slightly. The grinding stone quality was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. That engagement cost the Vreth Collective 11 warships, 4,000 warriors, and a fleet admiral. 12 warships, Elias said. The 12th one limped away and broke apart in the Caloris dust field about 3 days later. Your record keepers probably didn't count it because there was no one left alive to report it. Another silence. Then Kareth Vin said, very carefully, How do you know that? Because I was the one who sent it limping, Elias said. Desai pressed her lips together. She could feel the weight of every person on her ship pressing down on this moment. 42,000 lives balanced on the words of a retired old man who had walked onto her bridge uninvited and started a conversation with the devil. Kareth Vin leaned back in his command chair. It was a subtle movement, but it was backward, and Desai had spent enough time reading body language to know that backward was not the direction a confident predator moved. You were with the Ghost Company, the warlord said. I commanded the Ghost Company, Elias said. For 11 years. The Ghost Company. The name clearly meant something to the Vreth, because the shift in energy on the other end of the channel was visible even through the screen. Two of Karithvin's bridge officers straightened in a way that looked almost involuntary, like a reflex response to a word that had been taught to them young. Nobody on the Ardent Hope had heard of the Ghost Company. That was, it would turn out, rather the point. The Ghost Company doesn't exist, Karithvin said. It was dissolved. The UEF dissolved all irregular combat units under the Oran Accords. Yes, Elias said. They did. So you have no unit. No military authority. No weapons. The warlord's voice had hardened again, reaching back toward its usual confidence. You are a civilian passenger on a disabled ship. That's true, Elias said agreeably. Then you are no threat to me. Elias looked at the screen for a moment without speaking. Then he did something no one on the bridge expected. He pulled a chair from a nearby console, set it in front of the camera, and sat down. Slowly, with the careful deliberateness of a man whose knees had opinions about stairs. He folded his hands in his lap and looked at Karithvin the way a teacher looks at a student who has just made an error on an exam that they will regret. Karithvin, he said, I've been watching your fleet since you dropped out of FDL. 3 dreadnoughts, 7 support cruisers, 2 carrier wings. You're at about 68% operational capacity. Your 3rd dreadnought has a plasma bleed on its starboard engine column, which is why it's sitting 3,000 kilometers further back than your tactical doctrine says it should. He paused. You're on a resupply run. You're not here because this sector is strategically vital. You're here because your route home passes through it and you saw a disabled ship and decided on an opportunistic absorption. Karithvin said nothing. That means you're not expecting a fight, Elias continued. Your crews are not at combat alert. Your shields are at maintenance levels, not battle levels. And you've been in FDL for, I'm guessing, about 18 standard days, which means your warriors are travel stale. You can bring them up to combat readiness, of course. That takes about 20 minutes for a crew of your quality. He tilted his head. I'm not saying any of this to threaten you. I want to be very clear about that. I'm saying it because I want you to understand that I know the difference between a fleet that's ready to fight and a fleet that's ready to intimidate. And I want you to understand that you know the difference, too. The bridge of the Ardent Hope was so quiet that Desai could hear the ventilation system. You are one old man, Karithvin said, but his voice had lost something. Some essential certainty, like a note played on an instrument that was slightly out of tune. I am, Elias agreed. But here's the thing about being old in my particular line of work. The average life expectancy for a Ghost Company field operator was 26 months. I did 11 years. That means I am not the kind of person who survives by being strong, or fast, or well-armed. He looked at Karithvin steadily. I survive by making sure the other side understands exactly what they're stepping into before they step into it. He let that sit. You absorbed 42,000 civilians today, Elias said quietly. And I promise you, not as a threat, not as a soldier, just as a man who has studied your collective for 4 decades, it will cost you something you won't expect. Not immediately, but the cost will come. The way costs always come. He paused. Or you resupply at the next relay station, complete your route, and arrive home without a complication. Karithvin stared at him. You're asking me to walk away, the warlord said, incredulous. I'm asking you to do arithmetic, Elias said. That's all I've ever done. For 40 seconds, Desai counted. The channel stayed open and no one spoke. She watched Karithvin's face and saw something moving behind his yellow eyes, something she couldn't name. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like the expression a very experienced chess player wears when they realize, several moves later than they should have, that they have been looking at the board wrong. Then Karithvin said something in Vreth to someone off-screen. The translator didn't catch it. It was fast and colloquial and clearly not meant for them. But one of his officers responded, and something was tapped into a console. On the Ardent Hope's sensor screen, Ro watched with wide eyes as the Vreth shields dropped from maintenance level to standby, which was lower, not higher, than they'd been. I'm pulling back half a kilometer, Karithvin said. I am not retreating. I am extending a temporary tactical courtesy while I consider what you've said. I appreciate that, Elias said. If you are lying about Caloris, look it up, Elias said simply. Your collective has archives. The engagement report from the Caloris operation will reference a human unit designation. Cross-reference it. Kareth Vin cut the channel. The bridge of the Ardent Hope stayed frozen for 3 full seconds. Then everyone started breathing again almost simultaneously, and the sound of 40 people exhaling at once was oddly moving. Desai walked over to where Elias was still sitting in his borrowed chair and stood in front of him with an expression that was not quite gratitude and not quite suspicion and was very much both. "Ghost Company," she said. "Yes," he said. "And Caloris Station." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "What exactly did you do at Caloris Station, Mr. Cord?" Elias looked up at her, and for the first time since he'd walked through her bridge door, something flickered across his still gray-green eyes. Not regret exactly. Something older than regret. Something that had been carried a long time and had worn smooth from the carrying. "I won," he said quietly. He said it the way people say things that they are not particularly proud of, but cannot say differently, because it is the only word that fits. Desai nodded once. She didn't ask anything else. Outside, the Vreth fleet held its position in the dark, neither advancing nor retreating, like a hand paused mid-reach, waiting, for the first time in its long and brutal history, to find out what it was actually dealing with. That Kareth Vin's archives confirmed it in less than 8 minutes. The Caloris Station engagement was flagged in Vreth collective records as a Category 7 catastrophic encounter, the highest classification reserved for operations where the collective's forces suffered losses that exceeded projections by more than 300%. The human unit designation in the report was GC Actual, a field shorthand for Ghost Company Command Element, and next to it, a personal identifier that the collective had, decades ago, marked with a symbol that translated roughly into the human concept of a ghost. Not because of what the unit did to their ships, because of how they did it. Invisibly, surgically, and with a patience that the Vreth, who valued speed and overwhelming force above everything else, found profoundly unsettling. Kareth Vin read the archive for 11 minutes, sitting alone in his command alcove with the file open and his officers waiting on the other side of a closed door. His second-in-command, a veteran commander named Dreshka, stood outside that door and said nothing to the crew because there was nothing to say. She had served with Kareth Vin for 9 years, and in 9 years she had never seen him close a door to read something. When he came back out, he didn't explain himself. He went to his chair, sat down, and stared at the sensor image of the Ardent Hope for a long time. "How many warriors does the archive say were killed at Caloris?" Dreshka asked finally. 4,100, he said. "And how many humans?" Kareth Vin looked at her. 11. She processed that. 11 humans killed 4,100 Vreth warriors. "No," he said. 1 human and 11 others. The file is very specific. He looked back at the sensor screen. 12 humans total. He commanded 12 people. Inside the Ardent Hope, the hours that followed were a particular kind of quiet that Desai had never experienced in 20 years of space travel. It was not the quiet of safety. It was the quiet of standing very still in a field because there is a large animal nearby, and you do not know yet whether it has decided you are prey. Her officers moved carefully, spoke softly, and watched their sensors with the focused attention of people who understand that the universe can change in a single second. Elias Cord sat in a corner of the bridge with a cup of bad coffee that someone had brought him and appeared to be doing nothing in particular. He was not doing nothing. He was watching the Vreth fleet disposition on the secondary sensor screen with the peripheral attention of a man who had spent so much time reading tactical situations that it had become as automatic as breathing. He noticed, 40 minutes after the channel had closed, that the third dreadnought, the one with the plasma bleed, had shifted position. Not forward, sideways, which meant they were rotating berths, giving the damaged engine column a rest cycle. It was a maintenance decision, not a combat decision. That was good. He also noticed that Kareth Vin had not yet repositioned his carrier wings to a recovery pattern, which was what you did when you had decided not to engage. The carrier wings were still technically in a flanking configuration. That was less good. He sipped his coffee and thought about the particular mathematics of Vreth command culture, which he had spent a very long time studying and which was, in his experience, one of the most misunderstood things about a species that most humans had only encountered from the wrong end of a weapons array. The Vreth respected power, yes. Everyone knew that. But the specific kind of power they respected was not the kind you displayed by having bigger ships or more guns. It was the kind you demonstrated by understanding the situation better than anyone else in the room. In Vreth society, the commander who knew the most about terrain, about the enemy, about the costs, was the one who won. Not because knowledge was a weapon exactly, but because the Vreth believed, deeply and structurally, that a commander who understood a situation fully would never make an error. And a commander who never made errors was, functionally, invincible. What Elias had done on that screen was not threaten Carathin. What he had done was demonstrate, in precise and verifiable terms, that he understood the situation better than the warlord did. He had read the fleet dispositions, identified the damaged ship, calculated the resupply timeline, and named Carathin's strategic motivation, all from sensor data and 40 years of knowledge, before Carathin had said anything beyond an ultimatum. In Vreth terms, that was not an old man talking. That was a superior commander making an assessment. And Carathin, who had been raised in a culture where the commander who understood more was the one who survived, had reflexively responded to it the only way his training had ever taught him to respond to a superior commander. He had paused. The channel opened again at the 90-minute mark. No warning, no hail request, just open, suddenly, the way a door opens when someone on the other side has made a decision. Carathin's face filled the screen, and Desai, who had been standing in the center of the bridge, straightened instinctively. Elias set down his coffee and stood up. The warlord looked at the old man for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read. "The archive record at Caloris," he said, "lists your unit as operating for 41 days behind Vreth lines without supply, without reinforcement, without any support from your fleet command." "That's right," Elias said. "Your fleet command had already signed a ceasefire by day 11. "Yes. You continued operating for 30 days after the ceasefire." "We did." Carathin was quiet for a moment. "You didn't know about the ceasefire." Elias looked at the screen, and something in his expression shifted, very slightly, but Desai caught it. A tightening around the eyes. A tension in his jaw that appeared, and then was controlled. "We knew," he said. The bridge was very still. "Then why?" Carathin said, slowly. "Did you continue?" Elias said nothing for 3 full seconds. And in those 3 seconds, Desai watched him in a way she hadn't watched him before, not as a tactical resource, not as a strange old man who had appeared on her bridge at the worst possible moment, but as a person. She saw the lines in his face in a different way. Saw the weight behind the gray-green eyes not as stillness anymore, but as something that had been compressed over a very long time into something very dense and very heavy. "Because the Vreth units in our sector didn't know about the ceasefire either," he said. "And they were still killing people. Nobody spoke. So we stayed until they stopped," he said. "Simple as that." Carathin looked at him for a long moment. Then the warlord said something to his crew, and this time the translator caught it. A formal Vreth military phrase that meant approximately stand down from engagement posture. It was not a phrase Vreth warlords used lightly. It was a phrase with cultural weight, the kind of thing that was logged and reported and noted by historians. Desai's tactical officer Ro looked at his sensors, and then looked at her with an expression of pure disbelief. "They're going to recovery formation," he said. "All carrier wings." Desai looked at Elias. Elias looked at the screen. Carathin said, "Your ship is still disabled." "Yes," Elias said. "The Vreth Collective has a resupply relay at grid reference Keth 9. Your ship's engineer should be able to navigate there. The relay operates under collective protection and does not require a fee from vessels that arrive in distress." The warlord paused. "This is not charity. This is procedure." "Understood," Elias said. "Thank you." There was a beat of silence, and then Carathin said something that no one on the bridge expected at all. "You should have been given a better ceasefire," the warlord said. His voice was different on this last sentence. Not softer exactly, but stripped of its formal aggression. What was done to your unit was dishonorable. Elias looked at the screen without expression. "It was a long time ago," he said. "Yes," Carathin said. "But some things do not become shorter with time." He cut the channel. This time, the silence that followed on the bridge of the Ardent Hope was entirely different from all the silences before it. This one had air in it. This one had the quality of a room after a window has been opened. Ro confirmed quietly that the Vreth fleet was reconfiguring into a transit formation, turning away from the Ardent Hope with the ponderous grace of very large things moving through empty space. Desai stood at her railing and watched the sensor screen until the last Vreth ship turned. Then she walked over to Elias, who was sitting back down in his chair and reaching for his cold coffee. "Who left you out there?" she asked. Her voice was not demanding. It was quiet and careful, the voice of someone asking a question they are not sure they have the right to ask. Elias looked at the coffee cup for a moment. "People who thought the war was over," he said simply. He drank the cold coffee. Outside, the stars held steady and the Vreth fleet began its long, slow turn toward home. The relay station at Grid Keth 9 was a squat, functional thing. 3 rotating modules bolted to a central core, running on hydrogen scoops, and the minimal aesthetic ambition of something built purely to work. It was Vreth-operated, staffed by a skeleton crew of technicians who spoke very little and moved with the efficient silence of people who had been doing the same job in deep space for a long time. They received the Ardent Hope without ceremony, attached repair cradles to the damaged engine housing, and handed over a diagnostic report written in 3 languages, one of which was English. They did not ask what had happened to the ship's engines. They did not ask why a human colony vessel had appeared in Vreth resupply space. They simply began the work. Desai spent the first 6 hours at the relay managing her crew, managing communications, and filing a report to UEF command that she rewrote 4 times, because she could not figure out how to describe what had happened without sounding like she had invented it. The final version was factual and brief, and she suspected it would cause significant confusion at several levels of the UEF chain of command. She sent it anyway and turned her attention back to the ship. Elias, for his part, disappeared. Not literally. He was on the ship, but he returned to his passenger cabin and didn't come back to the bridge, and Desai found that she was not sure whether she should go to him. She had approximately 6,000 questions she wanted to ask. She also had a sense, the kind that comes from reading people over a long career, that the man had given what he had given and needed time before anything more was taken from him. It was Ro who brought it to her attention on the second day. He came to her office with a data tablet and a look on his face that she had started to associate with information that required sitting down before receiving it. "I've been pulling records," he said, "about the Ghost Company. And, Captain, they were dissolved in 2281 under the Oran Accords, which required the UEF to disband all irregular special operations units operating outside standard military command structure." He turned the tablet toward her. But the dissolution was quiet. No public record. No ceremony. The UEF filed the unit termination under a classified administrative code that basically means, "This existed, it doesn't anymore, and we would prefer minimal discussion." Why? Ro hesitated. Because of what happened after Caloris. After the ceasefire. He looked at the tablet. The 12 members of Ghost Company were operating 30 days past an official ceasefire order that they received and disregarded. Under UEF law, that's technically insubordination at minimum. Possibly conduct unbecoming. Possibly worse, depending on how you classify the engagements they ran in that 30-day period. Desai stared at him. They were protecting people. Yes, he said, but they did it without authorization. And the UEF had just signed a peace agreement they didn't want complicated by an ongoing rogue operation in contested space. He set the tablet down. So they dissolved the unit quietly, gave the surviving members honorable discharges, classified everything, and nobody talked about it. Desai thought about what Karethven had said. What was done to your unit was dishonorable. She thought about an old man on a colony ship, going to plant crops on a new planet, listed in the manifest simply as retired. She went to his cabin that evening. He answered the door without surprise, as if he had expected her, and that was probably because he had. He moved back to let her in, and she stepped into a cabin that was neat and spare, with a single bag that looked like it had been packed and repacked many times over many years. There was a photograph fixed to the wall above the bunk, the only personal item visible, showing 11 people in mismatched field gear standing in front of something that had been burned so thoroughly it was unidentifiable. They were not smiling in the way people smile for photographs. They were smiling in the way people smile when they are tired down to the bone, and they are still alive, and that is enough. Desai looked at it for a long moment. "Caloris," she said. "After," he said. "The day before extraction." She looked at the 11 faces. Young, most of them. One woman in the back left corner, who could not have been older than 22. A tall man on the far right with his arm in a rough field sling. And Elias, third from the left, the only one not looking at the camera. He was looking at something off to the side, And even in the old photograph, even decades removed, Desai could see that whatever he was looking at, he was thinking very hard about it. She sat down in the single chair the cabin provided. He sat on the edge of the bunk. "How many of them are still alive?" she asked. "3," he said. "That I know of." She nodded slowly. "And you're going to Elon, 7 because I'm going because I'm old and I want to grow things," he said. Not bitterly. Not with any particular weight. Just as a fact. I want to grow things and see them grow. That's all. They sat in silence for a moment. "What you did on that bridge," Desai said carefully, "saved 42,000 lives." Elias looked at his hands. They were steady hands, even now. The kind of hands that had learned steadiness the hard way and kept it out of habit. "Kareth Vin made a rational decision based on information," he said. "I just provided the information. You knew he would respond to it that way." "I hoped," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him. It didn't seem like hope. It seemed like certainty. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was the same low, careful tone he'd used on the bridge, but the precision was gone from it now. What was left was something more unguarded. "I've been in a lot of situations where the person across from me was deciding whether to do something terrible," he said. "And I've learned that most of those people, most, not all, have a part of them that's looking for a reason not to. They come in loud and certain, and they want you to fold so they don't have to think. But if you can make them think, if you can give them something real to calculate instead of just momentum, sometimes they'll choose differently." He paused. "Sometimes. And when they don't?" she asked. His jaw tightened fractionally. "Then you do the next thing." She didn't ask what the next thing was. She understood, in that moment, that the weight behind his eyes was not just made of things he had lost. It was also made of things he had done that were necessary and correct and still cost him, and would always cost him, in the way that necessary things sometimes do. Outside, the relay station hummed with work. The Ardent Hope's engines were being rebuilt section by silent Vreth technicians who asked nothing and required nothing except to be left to the task. In 2 days, the ship would be ready to fly again. In 3 months, it would reach Elon 7. 42,000 people would walk out onto green soil under a new sun and begin building a life they had been hoping for so long it had taken on the quality of a dream. They would not know how close they had come to something else. Most of them would never know, because the record would be classified, or forgotten, or simply too strange to be believed. But Desai would know, and Ro would know, and the handful of bridge officers who had stood frozen in that room would know, and they would carry it quietly in the way that people carry things they can't fully explain. And on the morning the ship left Keth 9 relay station, as the Ardent Hope fired her repaired engines and turned her nose toward Elon 7, a brief transmission arrived from the Vreth fleet. Now 3 days gone, somewhere in the dark between stars. It was addressed, not to the ship, not to the captain, but to a passenger manifest number. Elias Cord, cabin 14C. Desai saw the routing and brought it to him, watching as he read it. It was short. It was in Vreth, but the station's translator rendered it. Asterisk, the collective archive has been updated. The 30-day engagement record at Caloris has been reclassified from insubordination to honored defense. This reclassification carries no official standing in your government's records, but it carries standing in ours. Kareth Vin, Warlord, Vreth's 7th expansion fleet. Asterisk, Elias read it twice. Then he folded the data slip once, carefully, and put it in his jacket pocket. He didn't say anything for a while. Desai waited. "Well," he said finally, quietly. "That's something." He walked to the small porthole in his cabin and looked out at the stars, at the enormous, indifferent, beautiful dark that had been his home and his work and his burden for more years than most people thought possible to survive. Somewhere behind them, 11 names in a classified file had been given back a little of what they had lost. Somewhere ahead, a green planet was waiting for an old man who wanted to grow things. It was enough. It was more than enough. The Ardent Hope accelerated into the dark, carrying its 42,000 lives forward, and the stars did not care, as they never do. But the people inside the ship were alive and moving, and that is the only answer that has ever mattered, in any war, in any age, in any corner of the universe that human beings have ever managed to reach.